G'day, Michael. How are you?
Well, thanks, Andrew.
It's the last one for the year.
Last one for the year. It's come very
I think
quickly.
it could be the January one, actually. I don't know. But look, we're talking about water and sustainable farming. One of the things as a lawyer sitting on the side of all this and feeling a bit bemused by it is what we try and do in any industrial environment is we try and create some stability around input costs. And someone 30 years ago thought it'd be a really good idea if we made water subject to a market, which means in some years, a farmer will go, looking at my gross profit and the cost of water, I think I'll just go on holidays. I won't grow anything this year.
Opportunity cost. It's a great thing, isn't it?
But how do we think this is such a bloody good idea? I mean, what we're going to do, and we'll talk about it later in the show, but what we're going to see is a reduction in the variety of things growing in the irrigation areas because of the uncertainty and cost associated with it. And at the time when you need water most, when water is scarce, the cost of water is so high that some people just simply can't participate, and they just sell their water to pay for what they want to do in the year to sustain themselves to go to the next. But it means people with deliberate infrastructure, like tree growers, if they have 2 or 3 bad seasons, even though they have a high gross profit, they're eventually going to go, why would I do this? And Australia's going to go from this huge export-driven market that it is, and soon be going, well, look, there's some products we just need to import. Whereas we had the whole variety along these basins of water before, and they're gradually eroding. So what do you reckon? Is the water market a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I think it's been a good thing. It's driven the water market towards the highest value crops.
Yes.
Which generally is probably 1 in 5 years. You know what the Australian weather's like. Nobody can guess it. The last 5 years have been quite wet.
Yeah.
And if you talk to people in the water market, that's probably it hasn't been even though the entitlement price has been high,
yeah,
the allocation price has been low. So their return on capital has been low.
But it's so hard, isn't it, Michael? Because you look at what we traditionally used to grow up along the rivers, like rice, like wheat, a whole lot of things that were growing around there now, which have very small gross profit that sits in them. They're not sustainable anymore, are they?
Well, there's a borderline there. Yeah. You've got to know your cost of production in any industry, and we've always talked about that in the past ploughs that we've done. And it's about knowing your cost of production. And in those years where water gets, well, for example, in cereals, wheat, barley, once water gets beyond $80 a meg, you've really got to consider what you're doing, because it takes about 3 megs to grow a crop, and so that just adds another $240, say $260 to your gross margin, which is sometimes that's make it or break it.
That's make it or break it. So let's go to our first topic. So we talk about the water market. Okay, can you talk to me about what is the geography that is covered by the water market? So there's the Kimberley region. That's correct.
That's correct.
Northwest Queensland.
And then the Murray-Darling Basin.
Yes. There's a little bit in Tassie too, I think, in the Midlands, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So that's where there is market forces playing on the price of water. But what's an entitlement?
So entitlement is the same as an acre of land or a hectare of land. So when the water market was first initiated, or when irrigation districts were first formed, you got an allocation of water depending on the amount of land you had to support the infrastructure that you'd spent. So say the average farm had 300 hectares of irrigation, he might have had 1,000 megs of water associated with it.
So that's the entitlement they can get each year, but it turns on what the regulator is willing to allocate in water. So just say you've got 1,000 units, but the regulator says bad year, so you're only going to get 300 of those?
Yeah, that's correct.
Right.
So the allocation, the percentage, which is it's reported on every month, I think.
Yep.
So that you know what you've got, but generally you'll plan for that. And if you haven't got enough water, you're either going to have to buy some more in or get out.
So if we use a glass of water as an example, this is terrible, isn't it? I'm stealing from you. The entitlement is this amount of water.
Yeah.
Okay.
The allocation is that amount of water for the year.
Yeah.
The entitlement is the whole glass.
Whole glass, and the allocation is this. So next year I might only have half a glass, but I've still got.
You still got a glass.
But I only get this amount.
Yeah, that's right. And then that clicks over after the 30th of June. So then you get your full entitlement, and then it's based on allocation.
I'm scared to drink. but now this is a question I asked you before, and I reckon this, as a lawyer, this just cracks me up. So if my allocation is less than my entitlement, lawyer brain would go, okay, so if I get a 50% allocation of my full entitlement, then I should pay 50% of the price of what my entitlement would be. So if it was $80 a meg, I'd only pay 50% of that price. But that's not the case, is it? Because the market is regulated to what you're allowed to have, but the price is driven
by the market.
And of course, the less rain we have, the lower the rivers are, the lower the allocation, the higher the price.
Yeah.
So in the years, this is why I say it's bullshit. In the years when you need it most, the price is always at its highest.
Yeah.
And it's unconnected with your entitlement.
Yeah. So the farmer with the 1,000 megs, he's going to get he doesn't have to go and buy that because he already owns the entitlement. But if he needs more water, he's going to have to pay more money.
Yeah.
So because other people will have water allocation for sale.
Yeah.
And so he's got to plan that out during the year. So once you're in. There's you get halfway through, you've really got to go to the end. You can't just quit, because otherwise you've just wasted all that money.
It's hard, isn't it? And I know we've spoken about this many times, but I just want to reiterate, out of all the industries that I work in, and I work across education, I work across manufacturing, across food processing, government, the hardest business to run is a farm, because the inputs are totally unpredictable. Like we've seen a construction crisis across Australia over 2 years, and that is because supply costs, not labour costs, supply costs became unpredictable post-COVID. So during COVID, terrible, because the cost of a container went up to $10,000 from $800. That's now back down there. But so the box price really affected, and the capacity. But what's happened is that in construction, there's a fixed price. People went into fixed price construction, particularly the domestic market, and the supply costs went up with inflation. They went broke. And the construction market is saying, how terrible is. That's nothing compared to farming. Because that's only one element of farming. We've got climate. We've got changed market desire externally as to what is attractive one year and not attractive the next year. So farming is internally doing the farm is incredibly complex and technology rich now to do it well and to get the return of investment. But then externally to a market, construction is to a domestic market. There's only so much volume building you can do in housing. You know what the market is, and you know what the differences are, and they're around price, mate. Yeah. But the farmers, worse than that, the farmers trying to work out what it should be growing to sell into a market to get the best return based on a market it can't determine what the input cost is here. That's pretty frightening, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's been, in the last 4 or 5 years, input costs, fertiliser, chemical, because a lot of that's been imported, COVID, talking about shipping pricing and container pricing that was on imports was high. So it's been a very up and down period for the last 5 years in input costs. And I would have thought probably sitting about 20% above where we were pre-COVID.
Yep.
But it's gone higher than that and come back. So it's really...
And sitting with that's also land price, which has gone up dramatically over the last 10 years. Hopefully we've reached our ceiling there. But nonetheless, any farmer who seeks to engage and grow has met with this massive capital cost that sits next to it.
Yeah.
And I guess that comes to the other part about the infrastructure costs of irrigation itself, because if we used the Northern Territory or the Kimberley as an example, where they're thinking of doing cotton up the northwest, to actually get the water infrastructure to the location, it's unlikely it'll ever happen, I might add, but we're talking about 1,000 kilometres or 2,000 kilometres of water infrastructure. Every time you grow or utilise irrigation, you create that infrastructure on your land. So the more you want to use it, whether it's having a device that puts the water across, whatever it is, that's a cost. So that says 3 things to me. One, it says small producers have got their backs to the wall. They're not going to have the capital to do it.
It's challenging.
Yeah. And that's made more challenging by fluctuating weather conditions, which is more unreliable, and changing water prices, and a lack of technical skill to determine when they should be buying and when they should not be buying. Because it's hard to be a one-man multi-headed business, isn't it?
No, it is.
The second thing is the water market is changing what we produce. So you're going to the highest yield market to get the best utilisation out of water. So that's pretty dramatic too, isn't it, really, because we're seeing a change in where we are. And finally, technology itself requires a much more articulate, a much smarter business farmer, which means its traditional labour utilisation, which was such a part of farming, means that rural communities will start to contract again. So water is just one of the inputs I'm talking about, but we're starting already to see a change in labour utilisation along irrigation areas because technology is part of the change that is coming with it.
And dairying's probably gone through that phase in the Golden Valley.
Yeah.
The input costs there are enormous because they've got labour costs. And
they already had low butterfat. Can I just say, when you're up in the north where it's a little bit hotter, the grass is not quite so green.
Yeah.
There's a lower butterfat, so the actual value cost, the true unit cost of value is a bit lower as well.
Yeah. So they, as opposed to the rain-fed regions of the southeast.
Yeah.
So water's challenging, but in years like we've had in the last couple, it's been okay because the water prices have been low.
Yeah.
Industries like rice and cereals, wheat, their input costs, cotton, have been lower because of that.
Yeah.
But it's Australia, and we know what's going to happen with the weather, or we don't know. But
we don't know when, but we know what's going to happen.
We know it's going to happen.
Thank God we don't have agriculture in Melbourne because we get all 4 seasons into one day. It's a bit hard to plan here.
That's right. But so things will be determined by the weather, of course, as it always is in agriculture. But at the moment, I think you'll find that the network of dams that supplies the irrigation districts are anywhere from 60% to 85% full. So I think the next season's relatively locked in.
Yep.
Not only the one we're in now as well. So, but what's going to happen there? It's all about
that's your forward sales, isn't it? Because at that stage you go, all right, I know what I think I can do. I know what my input costs are going to be to a fair level of predictability. Therefore, I can make my export sales based on the percentage. First 30%, get higher clarity, get the growth in the plants to the level you want. I can forward sell a bit more. 2 good years, not bad.
Yeah.
Why don't we move on to the Murray-Darling scheme? Murray-Darling scheme, the biggest water infrastructure part, bordering New South Wales, Victoria, and South Australia.
Yeah. It covers 1 million square kilometres.
Yeah.
Really goes to, if you draw a line from Bundaberg in Queensland across, that's where it starts.
Yep.
And then finishes down in the Coorong. Everything in the water system, there's 22 different areas there. So of catchments that contribute to the Murray-Darling Basin scheme. So this is surface water we're talking. We're not talking groundwater.
Yep.
So groundwater's also included in that. So it's part of.
It's been hard to police the scheme, hasn't it? It's only really in the last year or two New South Wales have started to shoulder the burden of behaving properly.
Yeah, and it's a lot of the measuring tools now are better than what they were.
Yep.
The old paddle wheels are mostly all gone, which people could stick a fish in or stick and just let it flow. But really in the system now, it's pretty well regulated. Farmers look poorly across water thieves. They don't like that.
Yeah.
Because it makes it harder for everybody else. So heavily regulated market. They've been watched all the time. Technology's led that. So.
And it's, in a way, this has been our litmus test for the rest of the water industry, because this is where the greatest level of negotiation, federal and state government intervention, poor compliance over a number of years, very strong environmental issues that sit within it, which cause great concern, and we'll talk about that more when we go on to talk about the Southern Connected Basin. But the really interesting part about the Murray-Darling scheme is how long it has taken to negotiate and reach a sense of fairness across the years. I think South Australia would still be saying they're not getting the fair shake of the tree on it. But it shows how long it takes to get to maturity in the industry, doesn't it?
That's right. And you've got to have it all these states. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4 states.
I've got Queensland,
trying to work this out. And thanks to Federation, everybody's got their own thoughts.
Isn't Federation great?
It's just fantastic. But anyway, it's proven. It's had its challenges and still has its challenges. Everybody, I don't think they'll ever get a scheme to suit everybody.
No.
But farmers are trying to work with it.
Yes.
they've given up a lot of water. There's a lot of water that's come out. I think you look at all the water funds and the overseas. I think I saw a figure the other day that 11% of Australian water is owned by overseas entities, and there's a lot. The rest is owned by Australians. So
Yep.
a lot of those are farmers of retirement. They've got them in their superannuation trusts, and they earn a
What's
living
interesting,
on
it is interesting, as we do estates, and a substantial part of our practice in rural Australia is doing estate work and estate litigation. It's fascinating to see the water rights now as being something that would be held by parents after they leave the property as a method of money flowing in. So we're starting to see this as a genuine asset that's being held. And I guess, can I just say, when you have assets and we talk about estates, can I just send up the warning at this stage? Unless you have clarity around what are the assets of a business and you understand the input costs and the return on it, an asset is pointless if it makes no money. I know that that's not good for farming, which averages 2 to 3% return on capital. But what Michael and I have been talking about over the last 12 months is how do we get that up to 8 to 9% return on capital? And part of it is to be satisfied in your working out of cost, how I do get a return on my capital. Now that means understanding properly your yields, knowing exactly what is your margins, and building a structure around forward planning. Why don't we take the Murray-Darling scheme a step further and then look at the Southern Connection, the Southern Connected Basin, to talk more about what is the volume of water, what is the impact it's having on communities. Michael, can you talk to me more about the Southern Connected Basin? Where is that?
Yeah, so the Southern Connection, it's all part. It's that from Bundaberg in Queensland right through. So it all flows through in the same system. All ends up at the Coorong in South Australia. So it's got 24,000 gigalitres in the system. That on average, that's what comes in annually.
So what's that like compared to the Sydney Harbour?
So that's 48 Sydney harbours.
So it's a lot, isn't it?
So when you look at that, and it's about 6% of the annual rainfall on Australia goes into that system.
Yep.
That's what flows in, and on average, at 24,000 gigalitres, of which farmers has access to 28% of that.
And the rest is set aside for environment, really.
Set aside for the environment. So,
and that's significantly less than 10 years ago, isn't it?
Oh, it's significantly less. And the government's been working on that scheme with the farmers. There's a body called the Irrigation Council of Australia that sits in Canberra that works through that with the feds and tries to get a fair result. But of course, the government does what the government does. This was all set up by Johnny Howard 30 odd years ago. So. To make it fair and distribute it through the environment. So to put it in simple terms, for every 3 litres of water that's in the system, the farmers have access to 1.
Yeah.
So unlike everybody thinks we have access to everything, but we don't.
Yeah.
All the rest is in the environment.
So that reduction over the last 10 years, it really has changed our rural economy, hasn't it?
It has.
What's the major impacts it has on the rural economy?
Well, you've got towns, local towns along the river, that support these farming industries that are there, whether it be it's all the shops, it's all the input suppliers, it's the labour, it's all the people that work in irrigated ag. So as you reduce the size of that, so the towns and everything reduce with it.
It is interesting looking at the demography of Australia. So if you look at the major logistic routes like the Albury-Wodongas, you've seen dramatic growth in logistic routes, which go between Melbourne and Sydney, for instance. But if you look at traditional rural communities, they're shrinking, and they're shrinking quite dramatically. And they're ones that don't fall upon a major logistics path where you can build warehousing, you can do those sort of things. But what's happening in our rural communities is we are losing talent out of the rural community. We're losing volume, and therefore we're seeing more people moving into large cities. So 84% of Australia lives in 4 cities. It's dramatic, isn't it? So you don't think water affects things, but water dramatically affects the way we live because it changes the nature of the agriculture that comes around it. And with the changes of agriculture in technology and in finance and in its connection to overseas and export, and remember, much more than 50% of what Australia grows, it exports. We're starting to see the emergence of much more highly skilled, larger, capable farming enterprise rather than individual farmers.
Yeah.
And that dramatically affects the utilisation of labour.
I think I go back to one of the areas I used to work in northern Victoria. Once upon a time, when water was unregulated, when the water, so there's a water season that starts in August and then closes off in May. So they do all the R&M on the irrigation system between the repairs and maintenance of the channels and the system. Once upon a time, people used to open their gates in August and didn't shut them again until May. So there was no consistency of water use in what they were doing.
Yep.
That created a lot of problems, percolated a lot of salt out in areas. What happened? The change needed to happen.
Well, no, that's right. Can I just stop on the salination of land? If you go along New South Wales Victorian border and into South Australia particularly, there's heavy salination of land from the overuse of water and irrigation, wasn't there? And it's damaged some of that irrevocably, but part of what you worked in was actually desalinating the soil and reutilising it. But water doesn't necessarily produce a great environment.
No, if it's used incorrectly.
Yeah.
So we use metrics now, so water use efficiency, about how many kilograms of product you grow out of every millimetre of water.
Yep.
And go through that, and then you can put dollars to that. So farming's come a long way. Now that water's got a value on it, people don't waste it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just like throwing money.
Isn't it fascinating? I mean, it's probably not fascinating for you because you're a farmer, but it's fascinating for me that if I look at a plant, say it's wheat, you now know the various intervals along the growth of that plant that require fertilisation to get the highest product return and water. Now, I grew up in Western Victoria. A number of my dad's friends were farmers. They waited for it to rain. They fertilised the crop when they put it in. That was it. And they waited for rain.
So all their inputs were expended.
Yep.
All the money was done. And if they got a result, that was fine. If they didn't.
That's what they did. I worked on those farms and I've watched, as we put stuff down, they put the fertiliser. They used to have huge bags that used to sit on the back, and as the wheat was being put in, the seed was being put in, the fertiliser was being spread at the same time. And they'd say, so what happens during the year? And they go, rains. Okay, is that it? And they go, yep, that's it. Whereas now we know at each centimetre of growth what needs to happen.
And it's fantastic because the phenological chart, which is nature's calendar, right?
Yeah.
For every plant that we want to grow and expend money on, we understand all those things, like you're saying, and we can put those in. And a lot of, take wheat, for example, not so much in irrigated wheat, but because you've got the water to back yourself up. So you can go hard for yield because yield's king. So at the end of the day, for a permanent tree like an avocado tree or a citrus tree, that you've got water. Anything can happen with frost and air temperature and heat, and you've got all those things you can't control. But the water you put in and the times you put your fertiliser in, that you'll get a result at the end.
And the size of the land that you can grow a particular thing on. Because if I look at yields over the last 20 years with the advent of technology as well, we're seeing much higher yields because of soil utilisation, aren't we?
Yeah, that's right. And you go, and there's better techniques. We understand things better now than what we did 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So I think it's all about good management practice, and the good farmers are doing that and doing it well.
Well, let's talk about now how agricultural use has changed as a result of water control and water regulation. Michael, the control over the regulation of water use and the purchase of water has changed how the soil is utilised, hasn't it? Because if you've only got a little bit of water, your allocation drops in a given year, all the wheat type products, they're gone because the margins are so low. So if it goes over $80 a meg, there's no margin growing wheat, is there?
No.
But along the Southern Connected Basin, there was incredible variety of things grown, but we're starting to see a reduction in that, aren't we?
We are, and particularly in permanent horticulture. So they're going in nut production, for example.
Yep.
So when I first started in irrigated ag, the one to look for was almonds.
Yep.
Almonds were the highest producing, so they could afford to pay a lot more for water than anybody else. Now almonds sit about number 4.
Yep.
You've got things like citrus and avocados and macadamia nuts.
Yep.
Are sitting well above almonds, so for utilisation.
So you can, at that stage, you can have $180 a meg, and they're still making a good margin. But cotton, rice, wheat, completely wiped out.
Remember, during the peak of it, water allocation prices got to $800 a meg.
Yep.
So we're saying, right, there's a margin there that cotton probably gets to about 400,
yep,
450, and then you sort of got to think about it twice. And to do that nowadays with the input costs in cotton, now you've got to be talking 12 bales plus, in some cases 14, to make a margin on it. If you're talking 10, you're not even getting there. So, and I've been doing a lot of work on those gross margins of late, and it's because of those input costs of fertilizer.
Yep.
And chemicals that's gone through the roof, let alone the seed.
Yep.
So all these sort of irrigated crops now, you're getting, high value crops with high value varieties that are wanted, like the house avocado, for example, yep, and the sweet citrus mandarins that can go into China or go into India. So you've got to have something that somebody wants on the other side. The old varieties don't sort of click it.
And I guess that's part of why I put this last topic on. Once again, this shows the complex nature of farming, isn't it? Because you know what water price is probably going to be a year to 2 years ahead. There's sufficient predictors. You know the crop that you're putting in has to reach a certain level of yield and price based on what you're doing, because you're going to start forward selling what you're doing, which means you need to know the overseas market you're going to. Now, if you've got trees, you've got trees. Just that's what you're going to do. But it means it's much harder, doesn't it? You've got to actually get the numbers right to choose what you're doing. And it may mean you do avocados for 15 years, but you start to see that market's waning, and you've got to start going, I don't know if we can keep the trees. We're going to have to look at that change, because the market's changing. We're seeing China buying a lot more of these things, and that's starting to spread through Asia, and this variety will take off. You've got to keep thinking, don't you?
Yeah, you do, because at the end of the day, it's from 1 to 5 years till you start from planting.
Yeah.
So in 5 years, it can change. We know that. So you've got to be pretty secure about what you're doing, and your choice of varieties. So if you're in a particular market, they want sweet varieties, that's what you go for, and you pick those. The old time varieties, like I said previously, are not wanted, so you can't get premiums out of the market. You need premiums. You need to be in that. So, for example, with avocados, it's costing you around $3 a kilo, to produce that and sell it. So, and you've got something that you might be getting $5 for.
But we're seeing agricultural extinction now, aren't we? Through finance. So we're gradually seeing a reduction down purely to where market is. So a lot of the things we used to grow, we're actually not growing anymore, because there's just no margin.
No, and it's the bigger family corporates and the bigger corporates that are producing most of the products now. So, and we're seeing the smaller ones dive away. But
so if we look at this now, 3 things about water that really occur, the most important things about water to you, what would they be? What are the 3 big things as a farmer you've got to think about with water?
Well, availability, which is allocation.
Yep.
So, and one, you've got to have it, and you've got to have access to it. And then we've got to plan what we're going to do.
So 2 is really the plan. Do I use or do I sell?
Well, opportunity cost of water.
Yeah. And 3, how do I integrate water and technology and business as a model?
Yeah, so we make it more efficient.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's us.
Yeah.
We'll see you in 2025. And I think Michael and I are going to come out to the market a bit more. We're going to be seen around a bit. We're going to start doing a few interviews with people who are in farming or specialise in particular areas, to bring you little short interviews to supplement what we're talking about. So see you next time. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.